Today, I am going to go through the steps that I take to cover molded bra cups for competition bikinis and figure suits. I cover molded cups using princess seam patterns that I've drafted specifically to these cups. This is what you'll end up with. A seam starts up here at the peak of the cup, goes through the apex, and terminates at the bottom edge, about at the middle of that edge. Here you have the side cup with a very curved edge, and this side cup corresponds to this location. This is the front cup with a damn well near vertical edge, but there is shaping and it's just ever so slight. I've indicated the notches by using slits only. So it's not totally necessary to cut out these little triangular notches. So let's begin pinning our pieces together. Match the slits as best as possible and pin right about the center of those slits. So from here, what you want to do is make the front cup's edge follow the side cup's very curved edge. So about like this. As you pin, start at the middle and work your way outward. After pinning, you'll see that you have a bit of excess fabric that puckers up. This is perfectly fine. That's exactly what you want. This is what will create the three-dimensional fabric cup that will overlay nicely onto the molded cup. So this is the only part of my process in which I use my walking foot. It allows for both pieces to be fed through the machine at the same rate, which, prohibits shifting and slipping among the pieces. Right now I have a 75/11 Schmetz stretch needle set up in my machine, and as far as the stitch length, I'm going to bump it up to 3 millimeters at a basic straight stitch. When you start sewing the two pieces together, you're going to want to have the side cup on the bottom. So here's the side cup, and facing the camera is the front cup, the wrong side of the front cup. I use a 1/2 inch seam allowance in my patterns, and that's just in case I ever wanted to serge these two pieces rather than sew them together. So let's start sewing. As you sew, you basically want to follow the curve of the side cup, so the curve of that bottom piece. Here is the sewn up cup. We have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but we want to trim it down to about a 1/4 inch. Now on the molded cup, mark the bottom's center point. So it's about right here. This is where we're going to want the seam to meet up with the cup. First, we're going to align the apex, which is the highest point along the curve. We're going to align the apex of the cup with the apex of your fabric pieces. So just about right here. Spread your seam allowance open and press the two together like this. Find that center point along the bottom edge. Keep pressing the seam open. And we're going to place a clip there to secure the cup to the fabric. From there, keep pressing your seam open as you follow the curve of the cup. And pin at the top. Now we can stretch very slightly the fabric over the rest of the cup and secure with alligator clips. Okay, so we're back at our sewing machine. I've switched out my walking foot for a standard presser foot, and instead of the 7511 stretch Schmetz needle, I am now using the 9014, also stretch and also Schmetz, and it's just slightly larger and it will penetrate the cup more easily than the small needle. Also, our stitch lines. When we finish stitching, we want to make sure that our stitch lines are about 3/16 of an inch away from the edge of the cup. And the reason is that we don't want these initial stitch lines to be visible on the finished product. These initial stitch lines are going to eventually be covered up by binding, and so just make sure that it's well within at least 1/4 of an inch. I say 3/16 of an inch. The binding I use is stitched at 1/4 inch, so anything within the size of the binding that you use is where you'll want these stitch lines to end up. So let's get to stitching. Release some of your clips and get your cup and your fabric still slightly stretched underneath your presser foot. To make sure that I know I'm within 3/16 of an inch, I just move my needle slightly to the right, and I have the presser foot's edge aligned with the cup's edge. And as you stitch your fabric down, just follow the curve of your cup. And also, I recommend slightly pulling your fabric radially as you stitch, because when you take off your clips, you release some tension, and you want to regain that tension as you stitch it down. Next, we are going to trim all this excess fabric and threads away. So I trimmed away the excess fabric just by following the edges of the cup. And that's it for the princess seam. In the next segment, I will show you how I apply binding to the edges of the cup. For the bindings, I have 2 strips of fabric, each cut at 1.5 inches in width. These are for the cleavage side binding and the arm side binding. 1 strip of fabric is cut to a width of 2 inches, and this is for the bottom edge. Start with the cleavage side. With right sides together, we are going to attach the binding to the cup and stitch at about 1/4 inch away from the edge of the cup. Make sure that your needle is centered, and as we stitch, we are just going to follow the curve of the cup. If necessary, you can slightly pull the binding in order to follow that edge more cleanly. So here we go. Turn the binding over twice. And make sure that it's wrapping firmly around the edge of the cup. And clip to secure to make sure that it has that nice wrapped edge. To finish, we are just going to stitch in the ditch. So basically, stitch right inside the first line of stitches that you made. Now we're just going to trim all the excess fabric from this binding. The arm side binding will be attached the same way, except you'll need to leave at least 2 inches of fabric at the peak of the cup. So you'll have at least 2 inches of excess at the peak of the cup. This will serve as the rhinestone connection attachment point. So I sewed the arm side binding up off camera, trimmed, and also we have at least 2 inches of fabric. This is much more than 2 inches, but excess fabric tab at the peak of the cup. Now for the bottom. You can make this bottom binding either into a true binding, which is the way that we did the outer edges. So basically you stitch and you fold over twice, then you stitch in the ditch. You'll have these extra 2 tabs at the edges. You don't want to cut those off yet until you have added your connectors on either end, or however you wanted to address the elastic. The way I'm going to show you how to sew up the bottom binding is to actually make a channel. So we're going to again put right sides together, this time stitch 1/2 inch away from the edge of the cup, and then we'll go from there. So I'll see you at the sewing machine. Okay, with right sides together, we are going to stitch 1/2 inch away from the edge of the cup. So next what we're going to do is flip the binding over once only. And then on the cleavage side of the cup, fold this tab inward like this. And then stitch it down 1/4 inch away from the edge of the cup. So along the line of our first binding. So here is the edge with the tab sewn down. Trim that excess fabric off. And repeat that for the arm side. Finally, flip the binding over the entire edge of the cup and make sure that it wraps that edge snugly. Clip to secure, and we're going to again stitch in the ditch. So stitch it down right inside that line. Okay, so we have our bottom channel completely sewn on, and we are just going to trim away that excess. Now the only thing left to do is to string the elastic through that channel, and you'll end up with a cup like this. So this is my elastic strap. It's 3/8 of an inch swim elastic covered with the same spandex material. You can either use a bodkin, which is this, or a safety pin to string the elastic through. The final steps are to attach your rhinestone connectors to the center and also to your straps. And finally, once these are attached to your cups, attach the neck elastic as well. So the way we're going to attach these connectors is to simply fold the strap over and straight stitch as close as possible to the connector edge. So this is what it looks like with all the connectors attached. Whenever I sew the connectors to the straps, I make at least 3 to 4 straight stitch passes through the entire strap. Since this is a channel, you can position your cups along the elastic to wherever you'd like. So that's what I'm going to do now. Position them as close to that connector as possible. With soft molded cups, you'll see that this bottom edge will start to rebound with the elastic. That's okay. All you have to do is pull the cup's bottom edge to straighten it out. And it should be smooth. Same with here, you can see how it has rebounded with the elastic. And just smooth it out. What I like to do to keep the cups in place along the elastic is to stitch through all the layers. So you're going to stitch through the cup as well as stitch through the elastic. And same on this side, you're going to stitch through all the way to the back side. But not this tab, don't worry about that tab. Thank you so much for sewing along with me in this how to cover molded cups for competition bikinis and figure suits tutorial. Till next time.